have quite a job, I must say. Before I get to our second speaker, I just want to make a quick announcement. We have in the audience someone who is running for Palm Beach County Commissioner position. It is Rick Newhouse. And Rick, stand up. Okay. And the election is, I believe, about a year and a half from now. But remember Rick's name. He'll be here after the meeting, and I'm sure he'll be happy to talk to people. And thank you for coming and attending.
Thank you for doing this.
Okay. As I said, we are going to have a question and answer session after Richard Charnin finishes speaking. But I'd like to start now and start to introduce Richard. Richard Charnin is the author of the newly released book, Proving Election Fraud, which many people believe is a landmark study of our very flawed election system. Right. The book provides very strong evidence of continuing and systematic fraud in our voter election system, including presidential elections, which, and again, there is strong statistical evidence for this, the actual recorded vote has differed from the true vote in every presidential election since 1968. Those of us of a certain age in the audience can remember the 1968 election. Remember Humphrey v. Nixon? Time goes by very quickly, but it was one of the first elections I voted in. Mr. Charnin brings a very strong educational background and a work experience background to his research. Right. He has earned 2 master's degrees in applied mathematics. He has worked in aerospace as a manufacturing engineer and on Wall Street as a quantitative software developer. Mr. Charnin presents his evidence in a very statistically accurate and compelling fashion. I want you to be prepared to have your worst suspicions confirmed and also to be very enlightened. Please join me in welcoming Richard Charnin.
Thank you, Sam. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. Well, as you could tell from our previous speaker, things are not going as we would like them to go. There's a lot of opposition, and this is not just in Florida, it's all over the country. There's opposition to making it easy for people to vote, much less get their votes counted correctly. Let me ask a question before I get started. How many of you are aware of what's going on in Wisconsin right now?
Pretty active voting.
Okay, I'm surprised. Yeah, I mentioned that because I will get back to Wisconsin towards the end of the speech. But I was curious to see how many of you were aware of what is going on out there. Now, you know there was an election a month ago. The Supreme Court, Wisconsin Supreme Court. And it was very close, but so close that they had to have a recount. How many of you are aware of what's going on in the recount?
That I don't know.
Not too many. Okay. I'm working with people in Wisconsin who are actively involved in trying to get a good recount. The recount is over. The Republican was declared the winner. It matched the vote. The recount matched the vote. The only problem is the recount was fraudulent. So my point is that just because you're going to recount the votes doesn't mean that you're going to get a good result, a fair result. The fraud begins before you go to the booth, when you're at the booth, and after you leave the booth. Okay. I'm sorry to, the things I'm going to say here, going to be very disturbing, but you're all pretty much aware that election fraud has been with us for quite a number of years. So what I'm going to do, and what I have done with my book, yes, please. Thank you. I want you to I want you to all bear with me as a quantitative individual who worked with numbers all my life. I tend to talk in numbers. I think numbers tell you the truth. Words can be misconstrued, but when you have numbers and the analysis is done in a professional way, you get at the truth. Unfortunately, well, I never thought I would be doing this. I never thought I would write this book. Okay? And it really came about, let me just give you a little background. Sam said I graduated with degrees in mathematics. I was working with computers from 1965 in the defense industry on Long Island. I worked on Wall Street in investment banking in the 70s and 80s, working with investment bankers doing mergers and acquisitions. You might think that with that background, I'm over on the right side. No, I've always been a Democrat. But I have to say, I'm very disillusioned with the Democratic Party. Okay, and I know most of you are. The situation is very, very bad and getting worse. What I'm going to do is go through a little historical background. Sam mentioned the 1968 election. My book covers elections from 1968 to 2008. But I'll go a little bit further back than that. Again, this is just a little bit of history for context. My first election that I became interested in was 1952. I was 9 years old. Adlai Stevenson ran against Eisenhower. I started following that election as a 9-year-old. I was reading the New York Post when it was a liberal newspaper in those days. Quite different from since Murdoch took over. But nevertheless, it was a liberal. In fact, it was considered Richard Nixon probably called it a red paper in those days. But nevertheless, my father brought the paper home every day. I read it. And I thought that this is what kids did. And then only many years later, I realized that I was a little odd in that sense to be reading about elections at the age of 9. But anyway, let me go back a little further. 1948, Harry Truman won in an upset Tom Dewey. The last polling was conducted 2 weeks before that election. Dewey was way ahead. He was assumed to be the winner. Truman pulled an upset and was reelected. Now, the reason I mention this is that it's very relevant to what I'm going to talk about. In those days, polling, pre-election presidential polling, was very primitive compared to today. The technology was not there. They stopped polling 2 weeks before the election, rather than polling all the way up to the election eve. So, since then, polling has gotten better. I mean, it's much more scientific. We have pre-election polls, we have exit polls. My book is mostly concerned with polling. Now, let's go forward to, let's just again move through history. 1960, JFK beat Nixon, 118,000 votes. A lot of people said that that Kennedy stole that election in Chicago. The Mayor Daley did it for Kennedy. But Nixon never contested, and you know why? Because Nixon also stole a lot of votes in southern Illinois, which actually, and although I did not do an analysis of 1960s numbers, because I didn't have the census data going back that far as far as total votes cast, I can assure you that Kennedy did a lot better than winning by 118,000 votes. And I based that on my analysis of elections from 1968 to present. Now, how did I get involved in this? Why did I do it? In 2000, we all know what happened here in Florida. I was for Al Gore, I was a Democrat. I had no idea that elections were stolen or compromised. But I saw what happened in 2000 when the Supreme Court stepped in and took the election away from Al Gore. They did not allow a full recount. The Florida Supreme Court wanted the recount, and Gore would have been the president. In fact, Gore won the state, according to my numbers, and what I've seen in my numbers. I mean, the Miami Herald actually did an analysis of the numbers provided by those who counted the votes months after the election. Gore won by 50,000 votes in Florida. He did not lose by 537, which cost him the election. Okay,